Okay, good afternoon. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. Today, I'm very pleased and honored to have with me as my guest, Derek Liu, who's a partner at Baker McKenzie. Derek, welcome to the program.
Thanks so much for having me, Richard.
So, Derek, let me start by asking you why you went to law school in the first place.
I went to law school because I like to read. Right? Like fundamentally, I've always been an avid reader. And if you think about when I was at Harvard in the early 2000s, it felt like a quarter of the class went to iBanking, a quarter of the class went to consulting, a quarter of the class went to med school. And then the rest of us, that didn't have the math chops and didn't have the science chops, the rest of us got left over and went to law school, right? I think that was it originally, but it was also because I think the law's always had an attraction to me, right? Because it's a really like a system. It's a way of thinking about the world and ordering the world. And when I was in college, I was a sociology major and sort of, read Marx, read Freud, all these different theories of like what motivates people, how does the world order itself? And then law kind of, indirectly provides a set of rules. And as a nice Asian boy, I always like following the rules, right? And so the idea of sort of navigating rules and how those rules kind of help shape our world and our behavior really attracted me.
Interesting.
Now, then I got out of law school and it was nothing like that, but it was a good dream.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you, so how did you like law school? Did you like it?
I did. I really enjoyed the cases. I really took advantage of the fact that I was in New York City, I was at Columbia. And so, it was sort of like a really nice opportunity to both learn the law and learn this new trade, but also at the same time, really explore a large city. I hadn't grown up in many large cities before then, and to sort of like meet the variety of folks that attended, that was really a treat for me.
Well, I can certainly relate to that. I went to Columbia myself, enjoyed my time in Morningside Heights, so I know what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So tell me, you start off your career at the storied firm of Wachtell. Not many lawyers get to go there. Tell me a little bit about how that came about and how you liked your time there.
Yeah, no, I loved it for the beginning of a career. I think there's no better place to begin a career just because I think you're really kind of thrown in. I had taken a class when I was in law school that two of the Wachtell partners taught on M&A, and that had really kind of drawn my focus. And what I really liked about M&A was the fact that it's, feels weird saying this, but you don't actually need to know the law, right? M&A, more than any other discipline of the legal profession, is really all about a privately negotiated contract between two parties, and whatever, it's almost like designing a board game, right? Whatever set of rules you create for the two parties, that's a rule that applies. And so I really like the part that you basically get to structure an entire relationship. And so, that drew me to Wachtell. Obviously, it was very, very good M&A shop to this day, obviously. And I had a blast. I mean, I think I graduated during the beginnings of the 08-09 financial crisis. And it was just a time of a lot of uncertainty. A lot of my friends were getting furloughed and seconded to governmental agencies. And so for me to sort of like be able to even have a job, right? Like that was sort of like, came out of law school to have a job, but also to be practicing sort of at the highest end of M&A law. It was just such a treat. And the way that Wachtell is organized, they have this is all public, right? They have very low sort of partner associate leverage ratios. The idea is that associates are supposed to learn really fast and sort of come up the learning curve really fast and really start contributing from a very, very early point in their profession. And I think that's something that's really influenced me to this day, right? Even, I've been out of Wachtell for a decade now, but even now, the expectation that I tell the first years that are starting their careers with me is, look, you're not here to just do due diligence. You are here because you're an intelligent human being that's been, editor of law review, and you run your own nonprofit clinics, you've done all this stuff, so I expect you to be able to pick this up quickly and to go up the learning curve. And I think that's one of the things that Wachtell really ingrained into me, is sort of like, if you expect a lot out of the folks that are coming through to you, more often than not, they will deliver.
Do you think, I mean, you've been at a couple of different firms since Wachtell. Do you think Wachtell is really different from the other firms you've been at, or I mean, is there something really unique about that place, would you say?
I think every firm, you're right, every firm is a little bit different, right? I mean, I think now taking a step back at it, I do think it was unique in how selective it was in terms of the types of transactions that it took on. Right? If you kind of compare and contrast Wachtell with the two other firms that I've been at, Wilson and Baker, both of those other firms really kind of strove to be your daily outside counsel. I mean, for instance, here at Baker, right, like I do my clients' big deals, but I also do their small deals, because the whole point is to just sort of like have that lifetime relationship with the clients, so that they're just looking to you. And Wachtell had the very fortunate luxury of basically only picking the most sort of complex deals to work on, right? They did not want your average $100 million deal, right? They only wanted to work on the really large transactions. So it was selective in that sense. And then I think it's also just very unique in terms of that leverage ratio. Just the fact that they still operate with sort of I don't know what the number is. Back then it was really 1-to-1, right? I mean, you compare that to most law firms, which are, 1-to-3, 1-to-4, right? And frankly, now when I'm doing an M&A deal and I staff up, I'm staffing, 3 associates on every deal, because that's what you need to sort of like allocate to make sure everything gets done and gets done properly, and people are not sort of killing themselves. And Wachtell kind of had this opposite philosophy of like, we want you to work really hard because we think that's how you're going to learn, right? And it's true and it works, but it's probably one of the only firms that can pull that off, I would say. I mean, even if you kind of look at the firms that are, on that level, but maybe like a notch less. I mean, everyone else has higher leverage ratios. That's just sort of how big law's organized.
Now, did you get a chance to do any litigation, either in your law school days or as a clerk, to experience that, to compare that with doing transactional work, or you never really did much in the way of litigation?
I inadvertently, this is total luck of the draw, I ended up at an extern with then Second Circuit Judge Sonia Sotomayor. So back when she was not yet on the Supreme Court. And so did the externship thing, kind of really reviewed, did the law clerk thing, but, on a very light level. And we had a rotation going into Wachtell. We all had to do a litigation rotation, but I knew pretty early on. Going back to what I said about M&A, like litigation is the opposite of M&A, right? Litigation is all about finding that case. And I just remember, one of my first research assignments when I was a summer was, there was they had an argument in front of the Second Circuit, and they wanted some case to support the proposition that, in connection with is different than arising out of. And I literally spent days on Westlaw, like trying to parse this like infinite difference so that someone can make an argument in front of a judge about why there's, a difference. Phrases. And so I very quickly learned that was not for me. I love the pace of transaction work. I love the fact that most deals sort of begin and end within a discrete time frame, right? Like you're not spending your entire career working on one case. So it just sort of, as someone who, jokingly has a little bit of ADHD, like it's really much more suited to my personality.
Now, you left Wachtell, you obviously went to join Wilson, which strikes me as it could not be more different. Now you're working with startups and Series A companies. Maybe that's not what you did, but tell me a little bit about the contrast between being at Wachtell and Wilson, other than they both have law firms that begin with the letter W.
Actually, that confused the heck out of me because it was WLRK and then WSGR. And, they both sound like radio stations, right? I mean, I can't imagine how many times I was, typing the draft header and got that confused. But, they were and weren't. The particular place where I entered Wilson was through their M&A department. So the way that Wilson is organized is that they have a sort of a general corporate department, which is sort of very much what I discussed as sort of like the full lifetime service, right? They would start representing a startup client and they would do everything for it, the venture financing work, the exec comp work, and you would basically track that client. I always joked it was like having your own Tamagotchi pet, right? Like you would track your own little client as they grew from, a little seed startup all the way to, a pre-IPO and then IPO company. I was in the M&A group at Wilson, which meant that I came in when those companies were ready to be sold for the most part. Mm-hmm. And so that part of it was actually very similar to Wachtell in that it was almost exclusively a transaction-driven practice. Mm-hmm. I didn't do a ton of startup day-to-day representation, right?
I see. Well, given your Wachtell kind of an M&A powerhouse, and I get that Wilson does a lot of M&A, but what attracted you to that firm? I mean, it just seems like, were you looking to do more technology companies, or what's the reason you went to? What attracted you to that?
No, exactly that. I mean, I think if you sort of, and this is a massive oversimplification. If you think that Wachtell is the best place to learn how to do big ticket M&A, mm-hmm. I think Wilson at the time was the best place to do technology focused M&A.
Yeah.
I mean, right. It had so many connections, just in terms, and this was already, there's obviously been a large influx of East Coast firms that have come out West and had practices. I mean, Wachtell included, right? They now have a very successful practice out here representing tech companies in large deals. Right. But back in the day, the knock on the East Coast firms was that they just didn't have the grassroots reach that the local firms did, mm-hmm. right? And by local firms, I'm not just saying Wilson, but also Cooley, Gunderson, Fenwick. Those firms really felt like they were much more connected to the VC community where all the action was happening. Mm-hmm. And so what I didn't want was to go out West and basically, replicate a New York experience of only representing large Fortune 500s. I wanted an experience where I could get closer to the Silicon Valley founders. And I certainly think Wilson was terrific for that.
Mm-hmm. Didn't you go from at Wachtell, I'm sure you did both buy and sell. Wasn't your work at Wilson primarily sell side because of the way that business is structured? The technology companies grow up and then they sell them. What did you think about that?
Yeah, I think that's a fair characterization. I would say that's probably like 70 to 80% of what I did. I did represent a couple of serial acquirer clients, some of whom I still work with at Baker, but I used to do, when I was at Wilson, I did Salesforce's M&A, I did some of Google's M&A, I did Palo Alto Networks M&A. So we did have some buy-side clients, and those mainly arose out of just sort of very long-standing relationships with Wilson, right? I mean, they were just so successful at sort of cultivating these relationships over decades, such that, even after, Google was Google, they would still manage to hang on to some of that M&A work.
Do you prefer one over the other? Do you prefer buy or sell?
Well, I made my choice. I came to Baker, where I'm now primarily a buy side.
Okay. So I see. So then I guess you like that better.
I think that it is just by nature of the work. The buy side allows you to build deeper relationships over multiple transactions. Right? And actually this is kind of why I left Wilson, was that it always felt like we were getting parachuted in sort of at the moment of the sale, like come in as a SWAT team, do the transaction and then leave. And what that meant was that you really couldn't build a very, deep bond with your clients, right? Because they would disperse, they would go do their next startup, and it'd be years before you saw them again in another sale.
Right.
Whereas I think the buy side is, from an interpersonal perspective, much more rewarding because you are tracking clients across multiple acquisitions. You're in the trenches with them on multiple deals, and that to me is, as someone who's looking to sort of expand and solidify my own personal networks, that was very valuable.
Now you mentioned, you obviously like the M&A work because it's very discreet. It has a quick turnaround. Talk to me a little about, the complexity of it. Is that something also that you like? So do you like, are you more, like public deals are more interesting to you, or not necessarily, or what? Give me a feel for kind of the profile of M&A that really, is interesting to you, most interesting to you.
Yeah, that's a great question. It also was one of the other motivators for my moving to Baker. I happen to think that, like, you have to keep growing as a practitioner, right? If you keep doing the same transaction over and over again, you'll get incrementally better at that particular transaction, but the growth curve really starts slowing down, right? Because you're basically seeing this very narrow niche in the market and what you do, right? And I think, like, in the world of specialization, I mean, we as lawyers, we all tend to become hyper specialized nowadays, right? The debt financing lawyers only do debt financing. And by the way, they only represent the banks and they don't represent the company. And if they only represent the banks, they only represent one bank. And so, like, we're just rewarded nowadays as a profession for like really kind of fitting into very small niches because clients want to pay for the best, and they want to pay for the best in that niche. Whereas I wanted to do something different, which is I really wanted to explore more types of transactions. I spent 8 years at Wilson, more or less, whether on the buy side or on the sell side, doing two primary forms of deals. One was helping a VC-backed company sell to a larger company, right? And one variation or other in one industry or another, but basically that was the fact pattern, helping a US-based VC company sell to a large company. The other deal type that I did a bunch of was helping a public company sell to either another public company or sell to private equity, right? But it was all kind of within this constraint of sort of US technology M&A. And what's great, and one of the motivators for moving to Baker is now it's sort of like, the first transaction, one of the first transactions I worked on was helping advise on a hostile tender offer in South Africa. And then we did one with, like, helping a German online retailer navigate the post-bankruptcy restructure. And so just the variety of fact patterns that come at you when you are at a sort of a law firm that's not necessarily focused as much on one particular niche, that was really attractive to me.
So are you doing more than just M&A now, or it's still all M&A related, would you say?
I would say that I'm definitely doing more than M&A. So I do a fair amount, I dabble a little bit more in venture capital now. I spend 10-20% of my time in venture capital. And I think it's all M&A related, not in the specific transaction form. I think that M&A taught me a really nice core skill set that applies more broadly, even when you're doing non-M&A transactions, right? Like, when it's like, once you know how to do M&A, the transition, the learning curve to doing venture capital is pretty minimal, right? The transition to doing PIPE financing is, again, like, fairly minimal. And this is, I think another one of those things that I really have to, credit Wachtell for at the beginning of my career, because the way that Wachtell was organized, because it was so small, it just had a corporate department. Basically, you stayed in the quote unquote corporate department until you made partner, and then you were just a corporate partner. They didn't sort of create all these kind of niches, right? Like the capital markets guy, or the M&A guy, or the equity financing. They did have different debt people,
Mm-hmm.
but there was an expectation that, look, you're a generally smart person and you kind of know the basic principles of the SEC and you know the basic principles of Delaware law. You can figure out the various transaction types as they come up.
Mm-hmm.
And I think more than anything else, that's sort of a valuable way to kind of approach the practice of law, right? Like just avoid the pigeonholing and really kind of expose yourself to the wider range of transactions out there.
Mm-hmm. What about industries? Have you also been exposed to a lot more industries in your current firm?
I still spend most of my time, just by virtue of sitting in San Francisco, I still spend the vast majority of my time with technology and life sciences.
I see.
I did just sell, I just sold a hotel chain. We just helped Radisson Hotel sell itself to Choice Hotels. So I am starting to dabble more in sort of, as my other partners need me to, I'll go into other industries, but my first love is still tech. And I do think, in terms of industry focus, compared to what I just said about like, you want to have the broadest spectrum of practice types as possible, I do actually think industry focus is actually very valuable, right? Because industry focus is more about the people. It's about the people, and it's about like, what issues do these people care about, right? And so the average tech company doesn't care about labor unions, right? Usually doesn't care about, environmental remediation issues, but they care a ton about privacy. They care a ton about, IP. So I do think that having an industry focus, sort of good way of focusing my career in terms of, both getting closer to my clients, and then ultimately, right, I mean, the switch to being a partner now, most of my time is spent sort of building these relationships, and that's ultimately, what drives revenue as a partner, so the relationships.
Now, you're a very young partner, Derek. You have a very long career ahead of you. Could you see yourself doing anything else other than M&A or other than law even?
When not for quite a while.
Okay.
I do think that in my later years, I'd love to go back to my first love was always writing. I do think
interesting.
But I think, to your point about being a young partner, right? There's still so much to develop, right? I mean, I think sort of, as I think about my career in phases, right? I mean, the first phase of my career as an associate was just like learning how to get good at the craft of the practice of law, right? How do you make sure that the work product you're putting out there to your clients is just perfect, right? That's sort of the first phase of your career. I'm now at this next phase of my career where it's all about building relationships, right? Because now your partner, the expectations that you are generating your own revenue. And so that's this phase of my career, is really kind of going out, building, solidifying relationships, making sure that your clients love what you do and can constantly come back to you, right? So that's that phase. And, we've, to me, like, that journey is just beginning, and it's an endlessly rewarding journey.
Well, Derek, it's been a wonderful conversation. I really appreciate your taking the time. If at some point you do end up writing that book, please come back and tell me about it.
Yeah, absolutely. And if I ever start a podcast, I'll definitely hit you up.
All right. This is Richard Hsu and Derek Liu. Thanks.